What
He
is
called
this?
it love. The bank called it fraud.
Just sign it, Mother.
They say you can't put a price
I
on a
will
mother's
not.
love, but my son, Javier, found a way. It cost precisely $184,000, the entire equity of the home my husband and I had spent 30 years building. He had a sentimental name for this transaction. Of course, he called it protecting my inheritance. The bank, however, used a much colder term on the foreclosure notice they mailed to my door: fraudulent conveyance. It began, as the most profound betrayals often do, not with a shout, but with a signature. The pen felt heavy in my hand, a sleek, cold instrument that belonged to the bank's mahogany desk. It didn't feel like mine. For 40 years, my signature, Elena Moreno, had been a thing of quiet authority. It had endorsed my students' library cards, co-signed the mortgage on our first and only home, and traced my name next to my husband's, Carlos, on our daughter Sophia's birth certificate. It was a mark of my presence, my consent. But on that sterile Tuesday afternoon, it felt like a forgery of myself. "Just here, Mama," Javier said, his voice a warm, smooth balm against the chilly air of the loan office. He pointed a manicured finger at the empty line, a small black underscore waiting to bear the weight of my life's work. "This is the last one. Then it's all done." I looked at my son, truly looked at him. The years had sculpted my boy into a handsome man, with his father's dark eyes and a smile so charming it could coax secrets from a stone. He wore a suit that was a shade too expensive for a junior financial planner, but I felt a swell of pride. He was making his way. He and his wife, Chloe, had found the perfect house, a little starter home with a yard for a future I hoped would include grandchildren. All they needed was a little help with the down payment, a push to get them over the threshold. Carlos would have wanted it. "It's what the money is for, Elena," I could almost hear him whisper, "to build something that lasts." The money was from a certificate of deposit Carlos had invested in years ago, a nest egg I'd guarded fiercely since his passing. Giving a piece of it to Javier felt like honoring my husband's legacy, planting a seed from our sturdy oak into new soil. "It's a lot of paperwork," I murmured, my librarian instincts kicking in. I squinted at the dense block of text above the line. The font was impossibly small, a swarm of black ants marching across the page. "That's bureaucracy for you," Javier chuckled, his hand coming to rest gently on my shoulder. "They have to document every penny. It's just a standard gift affidavit, proving the funds aren't alone, for their protection and ours." The man across the desk, a Mr. Davies with tired eyes and a perfectly knotted tie, cleared his throat. He hadn't said much, letting Javier lead the conversation. Now he leaned forward, his gaze bypassing my son to meet mine directly. It was an intense, weighted look, and for a fleeting second, I felt like his ally, not his client. "Mrs. Moreno," he said, his voice flat and precise. "Just to confirm for our records, you fully understand that by signing this, you are authorizing a senior lien against your primary residence at 421 Elm Street?" The word hung in the air between us. Lien. It was a hard, angular word, nothing like the soft, round generosity of gift. A lien was a claim, a hold, a debt. It was the opposite of what I was doing. A sudden cold unease washed over me, a dissonance I couldn't immediately place. Before I could form a question, Javier squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a clamp. "A formality," he cut in smoothly, his dazzling smile aimed at Mr. Davies. "A technicality for the transfer. It's how the bank secures the gift funds against the new property. Standard procedure." He turned his smile on me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't you worry about the jargon, Mama. That's what I'm here for." He picked up the pen and placed it back in my hand, his own hand covering mine, guiding the tip to the page. His skin was warm, his grip firm. It felt less like assistance and more like insistence. I looked from his determined face to the impassive mask of Mr. Davies, who was now studiously examining a file on his desk, avoiding my eyes. He had tried. He had said the word. The responsibility, his gaze had implied, was now mine. Under the pressure of my son's hand, I traced the familiar shapes of my name. E-L-E-M-O, Reno. It looked like my signature, but it felt like a surrender. Javier released my hand, beaming. "There, you just gave your son his future, Mama. Thank you." He leaned over and kissed my cheek. The gesture was full of love, I told myself. It had to be. But as we stood to leave, I saw Mr. Davies make a small, precise note in his file, his lips pressed into a thin, grim line. The cold knot in my stomach tightened, a silent alarm I chose, in that moment, to ignore. The silence in the house since Carlos passed was a physical presence, a quiet companion in my daily routines. It settled in the chair across from me at breakfast and walked with me to the mailbox at the end of the drive. The mail had become a small ritual, a connection to a world that hummed along without me. Usually it was a predictable stack, a utility bill, a catalog for sensible shoes, a letter from a charity with a picture of a sad-looking animal. But a few weeks after my visit to the bank with Javier, an envelope appeared that broke the pattern. It was cream-colored, stiff, and bore the letterhead of a company I didn't recognize, Apex Consolidated Finance. The name sounded imposing, like a steel and glass tower somewhere I'd never been. My name and address were printed in a crisp, professional font, not the scattershot of a mass mailing. I slid it open with my thumb, my curiosity piqued. The letter inside was a single page, dense with the kind of financial language designed to be impenetrable. But certain phrases leapt out, snagging on the unease that had taken root in the loan officer's office. "Pleased to confirm the successful consolidation of your home equity account," followed by a long reference number. I read the sentence again and again. The word was wrong. Consolidation. It was a word of gathering, of bringing things together under one roof. What I had done was a giving away, a releasing of funds. And the bank we had visited was Meridian Trust, not Apex Consolidated Finance. A cold prickle traced its way up my spine. It felt like walking into a familiar room and finding all the furniture rearranged. Nothing was where it was supposed to be. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made me jump. It was Javier, here for his weekly visit. I folded the letter quickly, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and slipped it into the pocket of my house dress just as he came through the door, all smiles and energy. "Mama, I brought those pastries you like from the French place," he announced, holding up a white paper bag. He kissed my cheek, and his gaze fell to my other hand, still clutching the rest of the mail. "Anything interesting?" "No, just the usual," I said, my voice sounding thin and unnatural to my own ears. But my son has always been perceptive. He noticed the slight tremor in my hand, the way my eyes wouldn't quite meet his. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern that seemed, for a moment, entirely genuine. "What is it? You look pale." Before I could decide what to say, what to ask, his eyes darted to the corner of the cream envelope peeking out of my pocket. With a swift, fluid motion, he reached out and gently plucked it from its hiding place. "What's this?" He unfolded it, his dark eyes scanning the page. I watched his expression shift. The concern dissolved, replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't read. Annoyance? Recognition? And then it settled into a mask of weary exasperation. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake," he said, shaking his head. "It's already starting." "What is?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This, Mama. This is garbage." He waved the letter. "These are financial vultures. They buy public records, see that the lien was filed, and then they send this predatory junk mail, trying to get you to refinance or take out more money. They target seniors. It's disgusting." He made it sound so simple, so logical. A world of unseen predators, and him, my vigilant protector. But the name, the different bank. But it says Apex. We went to Meridian Trust. Javier sighed, the sound full of patience, the kind one uses for a child who doesn't understand. He took my hand, his palm warm and steady over my cold fingers. "They buy and sell mailing lists, customer data, everything. It's all part of the same big, ugly system. This letter means nothing. It's designed to confuse you, to worry you." He looked directly into my eyes, his own earnest and reassuring. "Listen to me. You have me to handle all of this now. You don't have to trouble your head with this nonsense anymore. My job is to protect you from things like this." With a final, definitive gesture, he tore the letter into 4 neat squares and then dropped the pieces into the recycling bin by the door. The evidence was gone. The crisp, official paper was now just trash, mingled with yesterday's newspaper and an empty milk carton. "Now," he said, his bright smile returning as if nothing had happened. "How about some coffee with those pastries? You're worrying over nothing." I let him lead me to the kitchen. I let him pour the coffee and set out the plates. But as I sat there, listening to him talk about the new curtains Chloe had picked out for their living room, I felt a profound sense of dislocation. He had an answer for everything, an easy, plausible answer that made my own instincts feel foolish, the product of an aging, anxious mind. He had not just dismissed the letter. He had dismissed my concern, reframing my valid questions as a symptom of my own vulnerability. I was the one who was confused. I was the one who was worrying over nothing. And yet, I couldn't shake the image of Mr. Davies' grim, silent face, or the feeling that the pieces of that letter, lying discarded in the bin, held a truth I was now too afraid to piece together. My daughter Sophia moves through the world like a current, whereas I have become more like a still pool. She arrived on Saturday in a gust of wind and purpose, her journalist's bag slung over her shoulder, and her eyes already taking in every detail of the house, assessing what had changed since her last visit. Sophia doesn't just look, she sees. It is her gift and, at times, her burden. We were standing on the porch waiting for Javier and Chloe to arrive for dinner when her gaze drifted to the curb. A gleaming black sedan was parked behind my modest 10-year-old car. It was long and low, looking less like a vehicle and more like a predator at rest. "Is that Javier's?" Sophia asked, her voice neutral, a tone I knew from experience was her most dangerous. "Yes, he got it last month. A company car, I think he said. A bonus for being the top performer in his division." I repeated the words Javier had used, words that had made me swell with pride. Sophia was silent for a moment, her eyes narrowed. The top performers at his firm get a company car that costs more than their annual salary? That's a generous benefits package. Before I could process the barb in her comment, Javier and Chloe were walking up the path. He looked impeccable, as always. But my daughter's gaze wasn't on his perfectly tailored shirt or his charming smile. It was fixed on his wrist. As he leaned in to hug me, the sleeve of his jacket rode up, revealing a watch with a wide metallic band and a dark blue face. It caught the afternoon sun, scattering light across the porch steps. "Nice watch, Javi," Sophia said, her voice still unnervingly level. "That must have been some bonus." Javier's smile tightened just a fraction. "You only live once, little sister. Gotta celebrate the wins." He winked at me. "Besides, when you're meeting with high net worth clients, you have to look the part." The tension was a third guest at the dinner table. I tried to dissipate it with familiar stories and my best roast chicken, but it clung to the air like humidity. Chloe, bless her heart, was oblivious, chattering away about a new brand partnership for her social media and taking carefully arranged photos of her plate. Sophia, meanwhile, was conducting a quiet interrogation under the guise of casual conversation. "So, how's the market, Javi? I hear it's volatile," she began, swirling the wine in her glass. "Always is," he replied smoothly, cutting his chicken. "You have to know how to navigate it, stay ahead of the trends." "Must be stressful. Long hours, I imagine." "The hours are what you make them. It's all about working smart, not hard." He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. The new watch on his wrist seemed to tick louder with every passing second. It was Chloe who finally walked into the trap. Sophia turned her attention to her sister-in-law, her tone softening. "It must be nice to have him home more, though, to have that support while you're building your brand." Chloe's face lit up. She was so proud of her online presence, of the carefully curated life she presented to thousands of followers. "Oh, it's been the biggest blessing," she gushed, putting her phone down for the first time all evening. "Ever since the layoff, having him around full-time to help with my content strategy and negotiations has been a total game changer. I couldn't do it without him." The word hit the table with the force of a dropped plate. Layoff. Silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a family meal, but a dead, airless void. Chloe's smile froze, her eyes wide with horror as she realized what she had said. She looked at Javier, her expression a silent scream for help. Javier had gone pale beneath his tan. He placed his fork and knife down on his plate with meticulous, deliberate care, the metallic clink echoing in the stillness. He stared at his sister, his eyes turning hard and cold. I felt like the floor had dropped away from me. Layoff. The word replayed in my mind, colliding with everything he had told me. The top performer, the bonus, the company car. A wave of nausea washed over me. I thought of the paperwork at the bank, the confusing letter he'd torn to pieces, the condescending patience in his voice as he told me not to worry my head about it. All of it, every proud moment, every reassuring word, was a lie. A carefully constructed fantasy he had sold me, and I had bought it without question. "Javier?" I finally managed to say, my voice a stranger's, thin and reedy. "What is she talking about?" He broke his glare with Sophia and turned to me, forcing a strained, unconvincing laugh. "Oh, Mama, Chloe is so dramatic." He reached across the table to pat her hand, a gesture of feigned affection that looked more like a warning. It wasn't a layoff. The company restructured. A whole division was eliminated. It happened months ago. I was going to tell you, but with everything going on with the new house, I didn't want you to worry. Months ago? He had been unemployed for months. He had stood in the loan officer's office talking about his job, his income, while knowing he had neither. He had let me sign that paper, let me believe I was helping him build a future on the foundation of his success, when in reality, he was building it on a bedrock of deceit. And the money, where did the money for the car and the watch and this whole performance come from? The cold knot that had been sitting in my stomach since that day at the bank began to burn. Sleep did not come that night. After Sophia had left, her jaw tight with a protective fury I hadn't seen since she was a teenager defending a friend in the schoolyard, the house settled into a profound and terrible quiet. The lies Javier had told hung in the air, a poisonous, invisible dust coating every familiar surface. His rushed excuses about restructuring and not wanting me to worry echoed in my ears, each word a hollow clink of counterfeit coin. He had looked at me with such earnestness, feigning a son's protective love, while his life was a bonfire of deceit, fueled by what? Where was the money coming from? The burning in my stomach had become a cold, heavy stone. I wandered from room to room, my hand trailing along the spines of books I couldn't read, looking at photographs of a family that now felt like a fiction. There was a picture of Javier, age 10, beaming with a missing front tooth, holding a trophy from his soccer team. Had the boy in that photo always been a stranger? My steps finally led me to the bedroom closet, to the small, fireproof lockbox Carlos and I had bought decades ago. It sat on the top shelf, behind a stack of old blankets, a humble metal guardian of our life's most important papers. The deed to the house, our marriage certificate, our wills, the passbook for the certificate of deposit I thought I had drawn from. It was our history, our security, condensed into a single 10-pound box. A sudden, desperate need to see it, to touch the tangible proof of a life built on trust, overwhelmed me. I retrieved the small key from its hiding place in my jewelry box and brought the heavy container down to the bed. The metal was cold to the touch. With trembling fingers, I unlocked it. The lid opened with a familiar, soft, metallic sigh, releasing the scent of old paper and dried ink. On top lay our wills, Carlos' bold, flourishing signature next to my own more reserved script. Beneath that, the deed, the official document that declared 421 Elm Street belonged to us, free and clear. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, remembering the day we'd made the final mortgage payment, the celebratory dinner we'd shared, the feeling of absolute security. Layer by layer, I sifted through the archaeology of our life together, and then I saw it. Tucked beneath Carlos' life insurance policy was an envelope that did not belong. It was pristine, sharp-edged, jarringly new amongst the softened, yellowed papers of our past. It was the same cream color as the one Javier had torn up. The return address was printed in a severe, no-nonsense font, Apex Consolidated Finance. My breath caught in my throat. My heart began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. He hadn't just intercepted my mail, he had been hiding his own inside my life's most sacred repository. With a hand that shook so badly I could barely control it, I tore open the seal. The document inside was not a letter, it was a statement. My name, Elena Moreno, was at the top. The account type was clearly labeled Home Equity Line of Credit. I scanned the page, my mind struggling to process the cold, hard data. Account number 745, statement period October 1 to October 31. Total credit limit $200,000 00. Available credit $16,000. And then the final line item, stark and brutal in its clarity. Current principal balance $184,000. $184,000. The number screamed up from the page. It was the exact amount, the precise sum I believed I had gifted him from my savings. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The sound in the room faded to a dull roar, the blood pounding in my ears. Every piece fell into place with the sickening, irreversible click of a jail cell door slamming shut. The loan officer's question, authorizing a senior lien against your primary residence? Javier's smooth dismissal, a formality, standard procedure. The letter I wasn't supposed to see? The successful consolidation of your home equity account. His condescending reassurance, you don't have to trouble your head with this nonsense. It had never been a gift. It had never come from the savings Carlos and I had painstakingly built. My son, my beautiful, charming son, had not accepted a gift. He had orchestrated a theft. He had sat beside me, held my hand, and guided my pen to sign away the security of my own home. He had leveraged the roof over my head, the foundation of my entire life, to secure a loan in my name. The money for the luxury car, the expensive watch, the down payment on his perfect house, it was all mine. It was a debt he had hung around my neck without my knowledge or consent. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in my hand. The warmth of a mother's pride, the glow of selfless giving, it all turned to ash, leaving a bitter, cold residue. I was not a doting mother helping her son. I was an unwitting debtor, and he was not a grateful son. He was a predator who knew his prey better than anyone else in the world. For hours, I sat on the bed with the statement in my hand, paralyzed by a grief that was sharper and more profound than the one I'd felt when Carlos died. This was the death of a different kind of love, the loss of an illusion I had nurtured for over 30 years. My first instinct was to call Javier, to scream at him, to demand an explanation I knew would only be a fresh cascade of lies. My second was to call Sofia, to let her righteous anger become my own. But I did neither. Shame had me in its grip, a cold, heavy cloak. How could I have been so blind, so foolish? There was only one person I could think of who would listen without judgment, who would see the numbers and not just the messy, heartbreaking emotion. Mateo. He had been Carlos's best friend since childhood, a quiet, steady man who saw the world not in shades of gray, but in the stark black and white of a ledger. For 40 years as a forensic accountant, his job had been to follow the money, to find the truth hidden in the numbers. I found him in his garden, tending to his prize-winning roses. He listened to my story without interruption, his weathered face calm and serious, his gaze never leaving mine. I told him everything, the words tumbling out in a disordered rush. The bank, the signature, the letter, the layoff, the watch, the statement from the lockbox. When I finished, my voice cracking on the final damning dollar amount, I handed him the piece of paper from Apex Consolidated Finance. I felt like a child confessing a terrible misdeed. Mateo took the statement and walked over to a small wrought iron table. He put on a pair of reading glasses that perched on the end of his nose and began to read. He didn't just scan it, he studied it, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence was absolute, broken only by the buzzing of bees among the rose bushes. He was no longer my husband's old friend. He was the professional, the man who hunted for deception in the fine print. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up, his expression grim. He folded the paper with deliberate precision and placed it on the table between us. "This is a classic structure, Elena," he said, his voice low and even. "It's designed to be confusing. They use one bank to originate the loan, a bank where you feel comfortable, then immediately sell the debt to a third-party servicer like Apex. That way, the paper trail is instantly muddied. The letter you received was likely a legally required notice of that transfer, which is why Javier was so quick to destroy it." He spoke with such clinical detachment that it somehow calmed the storm inside me. He wasn't reacting to the betrayal, he was dissecting the mechanism. "He told me it was a gift," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. He held my hand while I signed. Mateo leaned forward, his kind eyes softening with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Elena, in my line of work, I saw this more times than I care to remember, especially within families. There is a legal term for what likely happened in that office. It's called undue influence. The phrase was new to me, but I understood it instantly. It gave a name to the invisible pressure I had felt, to the way Javier had used my love and trust as a tool to get what he wanted. It means that one person uses a position of power or a relationship of trust to manipulate another person into making a decision that is not in their best interest," Mateo explained. "A son's relationship with his recently widowed mother, that is a textbook example of a fiduciary relationship, a position of profound trust. For him to exploit that trust for financial gain." He let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear and devastating. I felt a fresh wave of shame. "But I signed it, Mateo. My name is on that paper. Your signature is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the investigation," he said, his voice firming with resolve. "Your consent was not informed. It was coerced, based on a foundation of deliberate misrepresentation. That is the legal argument." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. It was a gesture of solidarity, not pity. Elena, listen to me very carefully. Your next phone call cannot be to Javier. Do you understand? Do not confront him. Do not give him a chance to create a new story, to destroy evidence, or to manipulate you further. He has already proven how skilled he is at that. He slid the folded statement back across the table to me. Your next call must be to an attorney, specifically an elder law attorney who specializes in financial exploitation. This is no longer a family matter to be sorted out over dinner. This is a legal and financial battle, and you need a general. His words were a splash of cold, sobering water. The fog of my grief and confusion began to lift, replaced by a flicker of something else, a hard, cold anger. He was right. Javier had made his move, playing a game whose rules I didn't even know existed. Now I had to learn them. The world of Diane Webb was one of muted grays and polished chrome, a landscape of quiet, expensive competence. Her office, on the 12th floor of a downtown building, felt a universe away from the worn comfort of my living room. There were no family photos on her desk, only a sleek laptop and a single perfectly rendered glass sculpture. She wasn't warm, the way you'd expect a person who deals with family crises to be. She was focused, her sharp blue eyes missing nothing. Her entire presence a testament to the fact that sentiment had no place in this room. Only facts mattered here. Following Mateo's advice, I had called her office that morning. Her assistant had fit me in for a consultation late that afternoon, a testament, I suspected, to the urgency in my voice. I sat across the wide desk from her, the HELOC statement lying between us like a confession. I laid out the facts as I had practiced them on the drive over, delivering the narrative not as a heartbroken mother, but as a witness presenting testimony. I kept my voice steady, my hands folded in my lap. I spoke of the bank, the lie about the bonus, the scene at the dinner table, and the discovery in the lockbox. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Mrs. Webb steepled her fingers, her gaze fixed on the statement. Mrs. Moreno, she began, her voice calm and devoid of pity. What you're describing is not a misunderstanding. It's a textbook case of fiduciary abuse, compounded by what we call presumptive fraud. The legal terms were cold and alien, yet they felt more accurate than anything I could have come up with myself. She was giving my pain a new vocabulary, one of action and consequence. Perpetrators of this kind of exploitation are masters of their craft, she continued, leaning forward slightly. They don't use a gun, they use the trust you have in them. Familial love is the perfect weapon because it's a key the victim willingly provides. Your son didn't just ask for money, he created an entire narrative, his job, the bonus, the gift, to ensure you would never think to question him. He didn't just break into your house, he had you hold the door open for him. The shame I had been carrying began to feel different, less like a personal failing and more like a wound inflicted upon me. You signed the documents, she stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact we needed to confront. Our job now is to prove that your signature was not the product of willing and informed consent. We have to methodically dismantle the fiction he built, piece by piece, and show a judge that you were operating under a false premise deliberately created by your son for his own financial gain. She picked up a pen and a legal pad, her movements precise and efficient. This will not be quick, and it will not be pleasant. We will have to be meticulous. For the first time, I felt like a student again, listening to a professor outline a complex thesis. First, she said, making a sharp, decisive note on the pad, we file a motion to get a temporary injunction, freezing the line of credit so he can't draw any more funds. Then we begin discovery. We will subpoena Meridian Trust for all documentation related to the loan's origination. We will specifically request the security footage from that day. We want to see him sitting next to you. We want to see his hand on yours as you sign. Another note. Second, we subpoena his employment records. We will get the exact date of his termination. We will establish that he knowingly misrepresented his financial situation to both you and the bank. That moves this closer to fraud. My breath hitched, but she continued, her voice an unwavering instrument of strategy. Third, we depose the loan officer, Mr. Davies. You said he looked uncomfortable, that he used the word lean. His testimony could be crucial in establishing that the bank's representative had reason to believe you might not have fully understood the nature of the transaction you were entering into. Fourth, we subpoena Javier's personal bank records and credit card statements for the period leading up to and following the loan. The new car, the watch, we will trace every dollar from your home equity to his lavish expenditures. We will create a timeline that shows a direct correlation between the debt he placed on you and the lifestyle he began to flaunt. She finally looked up from her pad, her blue eyes pinning me in place. The clinical, detached recitation was over. This is the anatomy of his betrayal, Mrs. Moreno. We will take it apart, bone by bone, and present it to the court. He will likely claim it was all a misunderstanding. He will say he was trying to help you, that you're confused, that you're being influenced by your daughter. He will try to use your love for him as his shield, just as he used it as his sword. She let that sink in before asking the final, most important question. This will force a choice. You will be taking legal action against your son. There is no way to do this quietly. The question you need to answer, Elena, is, are you prepared to see this through? I thought of my home, every brick paid for with a lifetime of work and love. I thought of Carlos and the secure future he had worked so hard to provide for me. And I thought of Javier's easy, charming smile as he'd guided my hand to sign away that future. The grief was still there, a deep, aching void, but now it had a partner, a cold, clear, and quiet purpose. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I had heard it in years. I am. Mateo and Miss Webb had both warned me against it, a united front of strategic caution. Do not confront him. But some primal maternal need to look my son in the eye and ask him why proved stronger than any legal advice. Perhaps a small, foolish part of me still hoped for a flicker of remorse, a confession that might, however faintly, begin to mend the chasm that had opened between us. So I called him. I asked him to come over, telling him only that we needed to talk. He arrived looking wary, the easy charm replaced by a guarded tension. He must have known this was coming. I led him into the living room, the same room where he'd taken his first steps, and gestured for him to sit on the sofa. I remained standing. I wanted the height. I needed every advantage, however small. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I walked to the coffee table and placed the single sheet of paper from Apex Consolidated Finance on the polished wood. I found this, I said, my voice a low, tight wire. Javier stared at the statement. He didn't feign surprise. He didn't even flinch. A slow, dark flush crept up his neck and his jaw tightened. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were not filled with guilt, but with a simmering, righteous anger. It was the look of a man who believed he was the one who had been wronged. "So," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "so finally got to you. I knew she would. She's been poisoning you against me for years, jealous of my success, jealous that you and I were always closer." The immediate deflection was so audacious it stole my breath. He hadn't addressed the paper. He'd attacked his sister. He'd attacked my mind. "This has nothing to do with Sophia," I said, my own anger beginning to rise, hot and sharp. "This has my name on it. This is a $184,000 loan against my home that you told me was a gift from my savings. You lied to me, Javier." He shot up from the sofa, his body coiled with a sudden aggressive energy. "Lied? I have never lied to you," he shouted, the volume of his voice a physical shock in the quiet house. "I have spent my entire life protecting you, especially since Dad died. Do you have any idea how complicated your finances are? That CD was earning nothing, a depreciating asset. I moved the equity into a position where it could do some good for the family, for my family. It's called estate planning, Mother. It's what I do for a living. The sheer gall of it was breathtaking. He was twisting his unemployment into a credential, his fraud into a financial strategy. He was gaslighting me on a scale I couldn't have imagined, painting me as a doddering, financially illiterate old woman who couldn't possibly comprehend his sophisticated maneuvers. It's not estate planning to take out a loan in my name without my knowledge and use it to buy yourself a luxury car, I countered, my voice shaking with a fury that was finally breaking free. Oh, here we go. He threw his hands up in theatrical despair. Is that what this is about? The car? The watch? You see a son finally achieve a little bit of the success he's worked his whole life for, and you begrudge him that? After everything I've done for you? He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a wounded, accusatory whisper. I sit with you. I take your calls. I manage your bills. I help you with the house. Sophia flies in twice a year for a performative dinner and she's the saint? And I'm the villain because I found a smart way to leverage your assets to build a future for your grandchildren? He was a master, a virtuoso of manipulation. He was weaving a tapestry of his own devotion and my supposed senility, framing his theft as an act of selfless love and my accusation as a symptom of a failing mind, cruelly stoked by a jealous daughter. He was turning reality on its head, making me the ungrateful, confused parent, and him the martyred, misunderstood son. Javier, stop, I said, holding up a hand. Just stop it. You were laid off, Chloe told us. There is no job. There was no bonus. That was the lie that started it all. For the first time, a crack appeared in his composure. His eyes flickered with panic, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by an even deeper well of indignation. And you believe her? He spat. You believe Chloe, who can't keep a thought in her head for more than 5 seconds over your own son? You're getting paranoid, Mama. You're not remembering things correctly. That's what's happening here, and Sophia is exploiting it. He came right up to me then, his face inches from mine. The boy I had raised was gone. In his place was a cold, calculating stranger. I did what I had to do for this family, he said, his voice low and menacing. And this is the thanks I get? An interrogation? Accusations? You should be ashamed of yourself. With that, he turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard that a picture on the wall rattled in its frame. The silence that rushed back in was heavier, colder, and more final than ever before. There had been no confession. There had been no remorse. There had only been a counterattack, a brutal, character-assassinating defense that sought to label me as old, incompetent, and crazy. The last foolish ember of hope I'd held for my son died in that moment, extinguished by the sheer, chilling force of his lies. In the ringing silence after Javier slammed the door, a profound clarity washed over me. The anger, the grief, the shock, they all receded, replaced by a cold, lucid understanding of the battlefield. Mateo and Miss Webb were right. A direct assault was useless against an opponent who simply rewrites reality to suit his needs. My son would never confess. He would only escalate, twisting my words, weaponizing my age, and isolating me from anyone who might help. He had already laid the groundwork, casting himself as the devoted son and me as the confused, paranoid mother. To continue fighting him head-on would be to walk directly into the trap he had set. I realized then that I had been a librarian for 40 years, but the most important role of my life would be that of an actress. To win this war, I had to lose the battle, and lose it convincingly. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or sadness anymore. It was the tremor of adrenaline, of a mind shifting from defense to offense. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I almost lost my nerve. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice clipped and hostile. What? This was the performance. I took a shaky, deliberate breath, summoning the memory of every frail, confused character I'd ever read in a novel. I let a tear, a genuine tear of sorrow for the son I had lost, slide down my cheek and infuse my voice with a watery tremor. "Javi," I whispered, making my voice small and broken. "Javi, please, I'm so sorry. Please come back." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, his suspicion warring with his ego. "I don't know what I was thinking," I continued, letting my voice crack. "Sophia has been saying so many things, putting ideas in my head, and since your father, my memory, it's not what it used to be. I get confused with all the numbers in the papers." I was using his own weapons against him, confirming the very narrative he had just tried to build. I was agreeing to be the person he wanted me to be. The hostility in his voice softened, replaced by a weary, condescending sigh, the sound of a man being proven right. "It's okay, Mama. I know, it's not your fault." "No, it is," I insisted, pressing my advantage. "You were right. You've always taken such good care of me, of everything. I was awful to you, ungrateful. Can you please forgive me?" The hook was set. The plea for forgiveness was the masterstroke. It fed the deepest, most narcissistic part of his personality, the part that needed to be the magnanimous hero, the gracious victim. "Of course I forgive you," he said, his voice now oozing a practiced, patronizing warmth. He was back in his favored role. "I'm coming back. Don't you worry about anything. We'll sort it all out." When he walked back through the door 10 minutes later, I had arranged myself on the sofa, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. He came and sat beside me, putting his arm around my shoulders. It took every ounce of my will not to flinch from his touch. He smelled of expensive cologne and deceit. "It's all just so complicated," I murmured into his shirt, playing my part. "All this talk of liens and equity, I just wanted to help you and Chloe." "And you did, Mama. You did," he soothed, patting my back. "You just let me handle the details from now on, okay? No more listening to Sophia. She doesn't understand how these things work." I nodded meekly, looking up at him with what I hoped were wide, trusting, and slightly vacant eyes. "Okay, Javi, whatever you think is best." He smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile. He believed he had won. He had successfully managed the situation, calmed the hysterical old woman, and re-established his control. He stayed for another hour, making me tea and talking about inconsequential things, every word a confirmation of his dominance and my supposed incompetence. It was one of the most difficult hours of my life, a masterclass in self-restraint. The moment his car pulled away from the curb, I locked the door and walked on steady legs to the phone. The actress retired for the evening. The general took command. My first call was to Diane Webb. "He was just here," I said, my voice now crisp and clear. "He fell for it completely. He believes I'm a confused old woman who has accepted his version of events. He is not suspicious." "Good," Miss Webb replied, a note of approval in her professional tone. "That gives us the time we need. The injunction will be filed by morning. He won't be able to touch another penny. What's next?" "Now you authorize us to proceed with the full discovery process we discussed. We move silently and we move quickly, while he's comfortable." "You have my full authorization," I said without a moment's hesitation. My second call was to Mateo. I relayed the same information. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, his voice full of a gruff pride that warmed me to my core, "Your husband always said you were the strong one, Elena. Now I see it. You give the word, and I'll start digging into the public records. Let's see what else he's been buying with your money. "The word is given, old friend," I replied. I hung up the phone and stood in the center of my silent house. Javier thought he was in control, that he had quelled a minor insurrection. But he was wrong. The war had just begun, and for the first time, he was not the only one with a strategy. EOT. The weeks that followed were a strange paradox. On the surface, my life returned to a placid normal. Javier would call every few days, his voice dripping with solicitous concern, asking if I'd taken my pills, if I needed anything from the store. He was playing the part of the devoted son with sickening perfection, completely oblivious to the silent, methodical storm gathering around him. Beneath this calm facade, a secret war was being waged. Every other day, a courier would deliver a thick envelope from Diane Webb's office, filled with copies of subpoenas, bank statements, and credit reports. And once a week, Mateo would sit at my kitchen table, his face grim, and walk me through the expanding map of my son's betrayal. I thought the HELOC was the entire story. I was wrong. It was merely the first chapter. He started small, Mateo explained one afternoon, tapping a highlighted line on a bank statement with the end of his pen. He had spread the documents out like a general reviewing battle plans. About 8 months ago, right after Carlos passed, he helped you set up online access for your main checking account, correct? I nodded. He said it would be easier for me to manage. It was easier for him to manage, Mateo corrected gently. Look here. The month after he had your password, he changed the mailing address on the account to a P.O. box he'd opened. Then he altered the direct deposit information for your pension. Mateo slid another document across the table. Instead of the full amount going into your checking account, he began siphoning off a third of it every month, redirecting it to a new savings account he'd opened in your name, but to which only he had access. The room tilted slightly. For 8 months, a third of the money I had earned over a lifetime of work had been vanishing before it ever reached me. It was a quiet, insidious theft. $1,000 here, $1,000 there. It was small enough that I wouldn't notice the difference in my daily balance, but large enough that over time, it became a substantial sum. But that was just the beginning. The subpoenas Miss Webb filed had yielded a harvest of deceit. There were the credit cards, 3 of them from major department stores and 1 high-interest bank card, all opened in my name within the last 6 months, all using the same P.O. box address to intercept the bills. The statements were a sickening chronicle of his and Chloe's aspirational lifestyle. Thousands of dollars in designer clothes for her social media posts, a $5,000 watch from a jeweler downtown, lavish dinners at restaurants I could never afford. He wasn't just stealing my security, he was wearing it on his wrist and eating it for dinner. The final blow, the one that truly shattered what was left of my heart, was the stock portfolio. It was a small collection of blue-chip stocks Carlos had invested in decades ago, a little rainy day fund he'd enjoyed tending. I had mostly forgotten about it, leading it to grow as a quiet monument to his foresight. Mateo laid out the brokerage statements in chronological order. 2 weeks after his layoff, he started liquidating, he said, his voice heavy. He sold off the IBM stock first, then the ATT, then the General Electric. Each transaction was a stab of betrayal, a desecration of my husband's memory. Javier had sold off the pieces of his father's legacy to fund a lie. I looked at the tapestry of fraud spread across my kitchen table. The redirected pension, the secret bank account, the fraudulent credit cards, the liquidated stocks, and the massive loan against my home. It was a web of staggering complexity and chilling premeditation. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation. This was a long-term, systematic campaign of financial plunder, orchestrated by my own son against his grieving mother. The gift for the down payment wasn't a singular event. It was the grand finale of a symphony of theft he had been composing for months. He hadn't just seen an opportunity, he had created a strategy. He'd isolated me, taken control of my digital life, intercepted my mail, and exploited my trust at every turn. His every act of supposed helpfulness, setting up my online banking, offering to sort my mail, taking me to the bank, had been a calculated move in his larger campaign. The last of my naivety withered and died under the harsh fluorescent light of my kitchen. The image of the confused, desperate son vanished forever, replaced by the portrait of a cold, meticulous predator. My grief for the boy he once was finally gave way to a resolute fury against the man he had become. There was no longer any room for doubt, no space for maternal pity. There was only the cold, hard evidence and the unavoidable truth of what I had to do next. EOT. Diane Webb had compiled everything into an impenetrable fortress of evidence, every fraudulent statement, every redirected deposit, every liquidation order. The mountain of proof was irrefutable. My strategic retreat was over. It was time to advance. The timing, Diane advised, was critical. It needed to be impactful, not just legally, but psychologically. It needed to dismantle the fiction of his success in the very arena he had built it to impress. Closed social media provided the perfect opportunity. She had been posting for a week about their first official dinner party in the new house, a celebration of their arrival, a curated performance for their friends. This would be our stage. I did not attend. I sat in my own quiet living room, the house silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. At precisely 8 o'clock, the designated hour, I imagined the scene. The low murmur of conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, the scent of a catered meal. I pictured Javier at the head of his new dining table, holding court, basking in the admiration of his guests. A man of substance, a loving husband, a successful financier, a devoted son, a complete and utter fraud. At that moment, a man I had never met, a professional process server with no emotional stake in our family drama, was walking up the manicured stone path to the front door of the house my money had bought. Diane had walked me through the contents of the thick manila envelope he carried. It was not a letter. It was a legal broadside, a declaration of war. The first document was the formal civil complaint, a cold, numbered recitation of his betrayals, detailing every instance of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of assets. It was the complete, unvarnished story of his deceit. The second was a demand letter for the full, immediate repayment of all misappropriated funds, a sum that now, with interest and penalties, exceeded $250,000. The third was a court order already signed by a judge that morning, granting my request for a temporary restraining order. It legally barred him from contacting me, from coming within 500 feet of my home, and, most critically, from accessing any bank account, credit card, or financial instrument bearing my name. His key to my life, the one he had so expertly wielded, had just been snapped off in the lock. I imagined the doorbell ringing, a brief, cheerful interruption to the party. I imagined Javier, perhaps slightly annoyed at the disturbance, opening the door to his perfect new home. And I imagined the server, a stranger with a nondescript face, saying the legally mandated words, "Are you Javier Moreno? You've been served." The beauty of the law, Diane had told me, is its lack of emotion. The server would not be angry. He would not yell. He would simply hand my son the thick envelope containing the complete and total demolition of his fabricated life, then turn and walk away. Back in my living room, the clock ticked past 8:15. My phone, which had been silent on the table beside me, suddenly lit up. Javier's name flashed on the screen. I looked at it, my heart steady. I did not answer. It rang and rang, a desperate, insistent digital scream. It stopped. A moment later, it began again, and again. After the fourth attempt, a string of text messages began to pour in, a rapid-fire fury of fury and disbelief. What the hell is this? Is this some kind of sick joke? Sophia put you up to this, that vindictive bitch. Mom, you have to call this off. You're ruining my life. My friends are all here. You're confused. Your lawyer is taking advantage of you. Call me. I read the messages, one by one, with a strange, cold detachment. The man who had called me paranoid and senile was now frantically accusing me of masterminding his public ruin. The son who had so carefully managed my finances was now locked out of them, completely and irrevocably. The house of cards he had so painstakingly constructed had just been hit by a wrecking ball. He had nowhere to hide, no new narrative to spin that could possibly contain the legal, factual reality that had just been handed to him in front of his friends. I did not reply. I turned the phone over, silencing the frantic buzzing. The battle was not over, but a decisive blow had been struck. For the first time in almost a year, I felt the quiet, steadying presence of control. He had used my love as his weapon. I was now using the truth as my shield. Checkmate arrived not in a courtroom, but in a panicked phone call from Javier's newly hired lawyer to Diane Webb. The evidence was absolute, the paper trail a perfect, damning circle. There would be no trial. There would only be a negotiation of the terms of surrender. Javier's initial response, relayed through his attorney, was an offer to work out a payment plan, a pathetic attempt to treat the systematic pillaging of my life savings as if it were an overdue cable bill. Diane dismissed it with the contempt it deserved. Then the direct attacks began. With the restraining order barring him from contacting me, he turned his efforts to poisoning the well. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years began to call, their voices laced with concern, repeating the narrative Javier was now desperately peddling, that I was mentally unwell, that my calculating daughter and her shark of a lawyer were taking advantage of my fragile state to steal his inheritance. I listened politely and told each of them to have a nice day. His old weapons had lost their power. When that failed, the tone shifted. Voicemails began to appear on my phone, not from him, but from Chloe. They were a bizarre mix of tearful pleas and veiled threats. She cried about the humiliation, about how her online followers were turning on her. She begged me to think of her, of the perfect life I was destroying. "You're tearing this family apart over some misunderstanding," she sobbed in one message. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, only a demand that I undo the consequences of their actions. Finally, the day came for the final decision. I sat once more in Diane Webb's sterile office, the glass sculpture on her desk catching the morning light. Mateo was beside me, a quiet, solid presence. "His lawyer knows he's beaten," Diane began, her tone all business. "The evidence of bank fraud and wire fraud is so clear that I've had a preliminary conversation with the district attorney's office. They are very interested in the case." She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. "Which brings us to your choice, Elena. We have two paths forward." She laid them out with clinical precision. "Path A is the criminal route. We hand everything over to the DA. They will prosecute. Given the mountain of evidence, a conviction is all but certain. He will face significant prison time, years. You will likely get restitution eventually, but the process is long, and he will have a felony record for the rest of his life. He will be branded a criminal. Prison. The word landed in the quiet office with a sickening thud. I pictured Javier, my son, the baby I had rocked to sleep, in a drab uniform, behind bars. The image was grotesque, a violation of the natural order of things. "Path B," Diane continued, "is a civil settlement. We go back to his lawyer with a non-negotiable offer. He agrees to a consent judgment for the full amount plus all my legal fees. To satisfy that judgment, he must agree to an immediate court-ordered sale of his new house. The proceeds of that sale will be transferred directly to you. He will be left with nothing from that asset, but he will have made you financially whole. In exchange, you sign an agreement not to pursue criminal charges. He escapes prosecution, but he loses everything he stole to acquire." She leaned back in her chair, her work done. The choice was mine. Justice or mercy? The state's punishment or a mother's? Sophia, whom I'd called before the meeting, had been unequivocal. "He's a criminal, Mom. He needs to go to prison. It's not just about the money. It's about making sure he can't do this to someone else. It's the only thing he'll understand." Her voice was hard, forged in the fire of her brother's betrayal. I understood her position. It was clean. It was just. Mateo, sitting beside me, remained silent, respecting that this was a decision only I could make. I thought about the two paths. One led to a courtroom, to public testimony, to seeing my son in an orange jumpsuit. It was a path of righteous, satisfying vengeance. It would brand him forever, a punishment that might fit the crime. But it would also brand me, in my own heart, as the mother who sent her only son to prison. It felt like an amputation. Necessary, perhaps, but it would leave a phantom limb that would ache for the rest of my life. The other path was quieter. It was not about punishment in a legal sense, but about consequence in a real one. It would not give me the public vindication of a guilty verdict, but it would restore my security. It would take from him the very things he had sacrificed his integrity to obtain: the house, the status, the illusion of success. It would leave him with nothing but the ashes of his own greed. It was a path that focused not on destroying his future, but on reclaiming my own. For a long time, I was silent, weighing the two futures in my mind. One was loud, a resounding clang of justice. The other was quiet, a definitive, final closing of a door. I looked at Diane, my mind finally clear. "I don't want my son in a cage," I said, my voice steady. "I just want my money back. I want my house to be mine again, free and clear. And I want him out of my life." EOT. There was no victory parade, no triumphant celebration. The end, when it came, was a series of quiet, antiseptic transactions, a flow of signatures on legal documents that reversed the single catastrophic signature that had started it all. Javier, faced with the undeniable evidence and the looming threat of criminal prosecution, capitulated completely. His lawyer accepted our terms without a single counteroffer. The house, his house, the one built on a foundation of lies, went on the market and sold in less than a week, a quick, clean amputation. I never saw the proceeds. Diane Webb had structured the settlement with surgical precision. The funds from the sale flowed directly into an escrow account. From there, she paid off the fraudulent home equity line of credit in full, extinguishing the debt that had been hanging over my life. She paid her own legal fees, Mateo's consulting expenses, and then had the remaining balance, the sum of my stolen pension and liquidated stocks, wired directly into a new, secure account at a bank Javier had never heard of. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only the quiet, efficient work of justice moving through legal channels. Sophia flew in to be with me for the final step. Together, we sat in Diane's office as she explained the last piece of the puzzle, the final architecture of my independence. "An irrevocable trust," she explained, sliding a thick document across the desk. "Think of it as a fortress. You are placing your assets, this house, your savings, your investments, inside it. You will be the beneficiary, receiving regular income, but you will no longer be the sole trustee. I've set it up with you, Sophia, and Mateo as co-trustees. Any major financial decision will require all three signatures." She looked at me, her professional gaze softening for the first time. "No one, not even you on a bad day, can be charmed or pressured into giving it away. This wall will stand long after we're all gone. It is the legal opposite of undue influence. It is a fortress of informed collective consent." Sophia, my practical, sharp-edged daughter, reached over and squeezed my hand. Her eyes were wet. "I told you he should have gone to prison," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know," I said, squeezing back. "But this way, my peace doesn't depend on his punishment. It only depends on my own security. It was a choice I had made for myself, not against him. The final communication I ever had with my son was a text message he sent the day the sale of his house closed. The restraining order had expired with the settlement, and he used the brief opening to send one last volley. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a single petulant accusation that laid bare the vast, empty chasm where his conscience should have been. "You took my house." I read the words and felt nothing but a profound and weary sadness. He still didn't understand. I hadn't taken his house. I had simply taken mine back. I deleted the message without replying and then blocked his number, a small, final act of digital boundary setting. That evening, I sat in my favorite armchair in the living room, the one Carlos and I had bought together 30 years ago. The setting sun cast long golden rays through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The deed to my home, now clean and unencumbered, was safely in the lockbox upstairs. The new trust documents were filed away. My future was, for the first time in a year, truly my own. There was no joy in it. The victory was hollow, the price unimaginably high. A scar tissue had formed where a mother's love for her son used to be. But in its place, something else had taken root. It was a quiet, somber, and unshakable peace. It was the peace that comes from looking into the abyss and choosing to walk away, not unscathed, but whole. I had learned the devastating difference between love, which is a gift freely given, and entitlement, which is a debt demanded. The cost of that knowledge was a son. The reward was myself. Elena's journey is a powerful reminder that the deepest wounds can come from the hands we expect to hold us. It shows that reclaiming your life isn't always a joyful victory, but a quiet, somber process of choosing self-preservation over a painful illusion. True strength is sometimes found not in the fight, but in the difficult, deliberate act of setting a boundary and closing a door for the final time. We hope Elena's story resonated with you here at Sylora Stories. Her final decision was incredibly difficult, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in her position, would you have chosen the civil path to reclaim your peace or the criminal path to ensure public justice? Thank you for sharing this time with me. Next time, we'll explore the story of a woman who realizes her daughter-in-law's loving care is just a down payment on a debt she never agreed to owe.